Having citizenship from a European Union country offers a lot of benefits. It also offers some potential risks, and I've talked about both. But today, I'm going to bring together all the good and all the bad so that you can hear all my thoughts on EU citizenship in one place. So we've had numerous conversations over the years about, for example, Malta's citizenship program. It's going to cost you about $1 million, take 18 months, and give you one of the best travel documents in the world that also allows you to live somewhere else in Europe. We've also talked about some of the challenges where the EU is attacking freedoms, where there's the potential to raise tax rates. And today I want to square that all together because I believe that everyone gets to make the best decision for them. There is no one best. Some people value the lifestyle benefits, the travel benefits, the optics of having a European passport above some potential risk that may never come and could be mitigated. But I want you to hear the good and the bad. That's what we're going to go through today. Now, if it's your first time here, my name is Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best, everything from lower taxes to diversified and well-protected assets to second passports. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And we also host the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live, open to all. All right, so let's be clear. It is in the aforementioned spirit where I believe, and we work with clients all the time, you get to make a choice. You get to understand the pros, the cons, the potential future pros and cons, all the risk factors. You make a choice based on what works for you. And people go in different directions. That is okay. What is the benefit of European citizenship? Just so you understand how it works, is if you're a citizen of one EU member country, and then again, you can add in like the Switzerlands and all that as well, but if you're a member of one of those countries, you get to live in the other. So if you become a citizen of Malta, for example, you and your family, by virtue of being Maltese citizens, can go and live in Ireland, for example. If you want a tax-friendly English-speaking country, you can go and retire in Spain. You can live in Bulgaria if you want, certain personal freedoms. And so you have that optionality. That's why Europe is so attractive to folks. Let's start with the good. You've got high-quality lifestyle. It's more developed. Generally, stuff works. Now, obviously, I can give you plenty of examples of Spain, for example, where we went to a bar a number of years ago. It was like the 29th of the month. And they said, sorry, no alcohol, no money to pay the suppliers, everyone's late. You probably don't see that so much in Germany or in Norway or in Sweden. But generally speaking, when you're comparing Europe to the rest of the world, you have more creature comforts, consumer conveniences, things that just function. You also have some countries that are English-speaking. So you have the Irelands and the Maltas and the Cypruses. You've got countries where people are educated enough, they just do speak English. If you're an Irish citizen, you can also live in the UK, and so obviously they speak English. And so that high-quality lifestyle, the access to English-speaking populations, obviously there are English-speaking populations in parts of Southeast Asia, in pockets of Eastern Europe, even in pockets of South America. But you have that more developed area in Europe. You also have, contrary to what a lot of people believe, because they look at Europe's high headline tax rates, certain tax incentives. So we mentioned Ireland, the UK, not part of the EU, but Malta, Cyprus, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Switzerland. Obviously, you can live there as an EU citizen. You've got little territories. You've got places like Gibraltar. So you've got places all throughout Europe that you can live with favorable tax conditions. And so paying zero, you can live in Monaco. If you are a certain type of profile, you can live there and you can pay zero. Otherwise, you're going to pay something. But if you're coming from the US or Canada, Australia, it's probably going to be much, much, much lower. If you were going to move to Europe and you wanted to live there, let's say you don't have a claim to citizenship by descent, you don't want to pay $1 million to fast track your citizenship, you can generally work towards dual citizenship. So rather than living in a place that's totally tax-free for most people, like a Dubai, rather than living in a place like a Vanuatu or some far-flung place, or Panama that's pretty tax-friendly, but maybe less likely to grant you citizenship, or a place in Southeast Asia, which is just not going to do it, you can generally work towards citizenship. And with a few exceptions, some of which are changing, you can have dual citizenship. So you're not going to have to make a choice, do I want to give up my current citizenship or not. You can just get the new one with a few exceptions. Basically, any European Union passport is going to be an excellent quality passport. You've got a few that don't have visa-free access to the United States. But by and large, when a country and citizens get to come to Europe, they're required to reciprocate that. And so there's a couple countries for whom Australia kind of gives a hard time. There's a couple countries for whom the US requires a visa. So, for example, Cyprus, Bulgaria, Romania, they've been opening up. So Poland and Croatia got access to the U.S. recently, so it's improving. But generally speaking, whether you can go to the U.S. or not, whether Australia asks you a few questions or not, having an EU passport is a high-quality document. And so if you're someone who says, I'm an American or I'm Canadian or I'm Australian, I don't like the way my country's going, they're taxing me on a worldwide basis, or believe that they may in the future, I want to have a passport, but I don't know, it's so hard to think like, let me just get a Caribbean passport. That seems a little bit insecure. Even though the travel is pretty good, I want the best. Okay, excellent quality passports. Even if you were Bulgarian, you're getting around the world pretty well. You can also travel within the EU while you live there. And so for someone who, again, let's say you're coming from the United States and you want to travel around, what people tell me is, I moved to Singapore, it was a little claustrophobic. I had to be there for 6 months a year. In the middle, I was living there 9 months a year. I just wanted to get out occasionally. Obviously, in Europe, you have the ability to move around. And so even if you are working towards naturalization, you have this big block that you can go to. It's a bit less frictionless, generally speaking. Obviously, once you are a citizen, you can move around that easily. And so you have the access to move to other countries. And so you can relocate within the block for financial reasons. Hey, there's a new tax incentive over there. I want to take advantage of that, right? Even in some cases, if you're a citizen of the country. So you can be an Italian who hasn't paid taxes in Italy at any time in the recent past, and you can go and move there. You could also then say, after a while, you know what, I've had enough, now I'm going to move to Ireland or Cyprus. And so you could move for financial incentive. You could move for more personal freedom if you were in a place where they wouldn't let you move around or they're restricting your freedom in other ways. Move to a place where it's more open. You can move for lifestyle reasons. Hey, I'm from Norway. I'm tired of the weather. I want to move to Portugal. All right. We actually have people who are like, I'm tired of the heat, and I can see after many years living in largely tropical locations, I like some cool weather. Hey, I'm moving to Latvia. Okay. So those are all the good things. You have this freedom of movement. Even if you're staying there on the path to being naturalized, you can have some flexibility. It's a big open space. You get an excellent quality passport that generally allows for dual citizenship or multiple citizenship. There's plenty of tax incentives that you can gain as a citizen of the bloc or a resident of the bloc. And you've got obviously a very well-developed lifestyle and infrastructure. Now, let's talk about the challenges. One of the challenges obviously is tax incentives could wear out. Now, you could say that the Cayman Islands, which kind of has this culture of we don't want to have direct taxation, or the UAE or Gulf countries, which have for a long time been known for zero tax, you could say, hey, they're going to change. And by the way, you've seen now a VAT in the UAE. You're seeing an onshore companies tax in the UAE. Bahrain is now saying maybe they'll do the same. Does that necessarily affect you? Could you still live there tax-free? Yeah, I think you could. But you could argue anyone's tax incentives could wear out. Maybe you argue more strongly that Europe's will. That said, you are seeing more countries open them up, but who knows? It could wear out. What does concern me right now is that, generally speaking, on tax issues, the EU said we need to come together as a bloc. Now they're trying to push for, you know what, we're tired of Hungary and Poland getting in our way and arguing with this, or very briefly before Ireland, they'll sometimes argue. We're tired of like one or two people who hold out, especially when they've kind of painted Hungary and Poland in this different light. And no doubt those countries don't act like Western European countries, but they have kind of gummed up the works on some tax stuff, and now Europe is saying, let's just allow a majority. And so what does that mean? Now it means that as long as there's enough high-tax countries in Europe, they can change policy. And I've argued, potentially, that could even mean citizenship-based taxation, either the block level, which seems really quite difficult, but possible. Who knows what could push that? Or it's some kind of national level. So do I think that's out of the realm of possibility that France could try and impose some kind of tax on citizens? It may not be a US-style tax on citizens. It may just be every French citizen needs to pay something. By the way, they already have that. It's called French who live in Monaco after the last 6 decades pay as if they live in France. And that's not the only situation in the world where similar rules apply. It happens with Colombians in Panama, and other situations. So you already have some very, very light version of citizenship-based taxation. Hungary has some situations where that could be the case. And so, could you see that play out? Could you see that not only could tax incentives wear out, but the bloc could push countries to, have some kind of minimum tax on their citizens? In that case, what I have said before is, I would imagine if you are French and you move to Ireland and you take advantage of Irish tax incentives for foreigners, that there's a greater likelihood that because it's within the EU, that would have to be exempted. And so you could say, okay, you're going to have the access to dramatically lower your taxes, but if you just want to live, move to Dubai and pay zero, maybe they're going to say, hey, there's a minimum to pay, or you just pay full boat as if it's Monaco. They just kind of expand that inclusion of places where you can't move, and more countries could do that. So there's any number of different ways they could do that. I have said that to reduce that risk, I would imagine that living within Europe would mitigate that. So if you just want to get the passport and run, that would be a higher likelihood, in my opinion. Wealth taxes certainly are a thing that a lot of European countries have gotten away from. The tide is moving in the direction of let's tax people more. We're going back to all this kind of stuff in Western countries that has already failed before. You're seeing politicians in the U.S. pushing for wealth taxes. And so, by the way, what's to say if the U.S. doesn't have some kind of wealth tax in the future, which politicians like Elizabeth Warren have said would work there because you can't escape it, unlike a French citizen who could move to Belgium to escape it or something like that. Americans are taxed no matter where they live. It's extraterritorial. And so if that were to happen in the U.S., what's to say that Europe wouldn't say, okay, well, we have the wealth tax, let's have the extraterritorial, and let's have it follow you wherever you go. Some of the countries, it seems harder to believe. Other countries, I think could push that through. So extraterritorial tax or a citizenship-based taxation. Could more countries bring back wealth taxes? Again, if they did, and you could avoid that by moving, then that could work. Tax incentives could be reduced. Obviously, what a lot of people are concerned about in Europe is the culture is changing. Certain people who are more conservative are saying it's becoming much more of a woke culture. I've been in Western Europe a couple times in the last year. I don't spend a ton of time there. I haven't. I can't say it's as much as what I would see in the U.S., but certainly you are seeing a different kind of culture there. What people have also said is fewer freedoms. Now, does being a citizen of a country really dictate your freedoms? Well, it does to the extent that they regulate things that you can do as a citizen. That's one of the little discussed challenges of U.S. citizenship is there's a bunch of restrictions that if you run a business overseas, it doesn't apply to a lot of people who just run an e-commerce business or a consulting firm. But if you're doing kind of infrastructure level business overseas, there's certain things you need to do as an American to make sure that you are in compliance, and they have more authority over you than most other countries have over their citizens. And so if other countries in Europe were to start, putting together that, then that would affect your freedoms. If it's just a matter of, hey, there's restrictions on your ability to move around or whatever, then perhaps if you're living somewhere else that you just bypass that, you get the high quality passport. And it's like Australians. What downside did Australians have if they were outside of Australia during the pandemic and didn't want to come back? The problem was they'd been paying taxes all those years. They were supposed to be one of us, quote unquote, to Australia, and they got basically trapped outside. If you're an Australian who wanted to be trapped outside, nothing really else affected you as long as the government would renew your passport, right? And so you do see some reduced freedoms. There's certainly a ton of bureaucracy in the EU. The question is, if you're not living there, how does that really affect you? To me, the biggest issues would be taxation. It seems to be a large, a decent, issue that would have to be built up to. We do have Europeans who are saying, I'm concerned about my EU citizenship because they could introduce something. They hear the headlines. They hear some of the politicians, which are becoming less and less on the fringe and more in the mainstream. So my suggestion is, if you can qualify for a European passport, make it a cost-benefit analysis. I mean, if it's for free through descent, I would take it. If you want to live there and you're going to get it anyway, I would take it, right? If, I have, some ability to do tax planning, I would have a European Union citizenship. But I think obviously it benefits someone who likes the benefits of what Europe has to offer, and or they're willing to take this chance that, hey, if I'm leaving the U.S., for example, I want the same level passport. They don't have anywhere near what the issues the U.S. has now, so I'll take this now and figure it out later. Certainly, I don't want to be someone who's in the business of constantly changing my nationality. I would like to be adding new ones. I don't want to be constantly changing, but if 10 or 20 years from now you've got a problem with one of these passports, certainly you could always replace it then. I wouldn't try and necessarily project things out so far. I would try and go as far as I can see, and then I'll see further. That's my thoughts on the good and bad of the EU and holding an EU passport.